Hey creeps, it's Horror Free For All. Continuing my passion project I affectionately call Hall of Creeps, a series where I look at full-length feature films that in my opinion resemble what you would expect out of a segment that would belong in one of my favorite horror anthology series, if not my favorite horror anthology series of all time, Creepshow. Now the film in question that we're going to be discussing today came out this year in 2025. It was written for screen by Osgood Perkins and also directed by Osgood Perkins, and it was produced by James Wan. And the film in question is The Monkey. Now, The Monkey is actually based on a short story that was featured in Stephen King's Skeleton Crew horror anthology book from the 1980s. And if you live under a rock, Stephen King was also the co-creator alongside George Romero of Creepshow. So naturally, this movie should ring a lot of alarm bells that it probably would have served better in Creepshow as opposed to a full-length movie. And I have to say up front, I think that The Monkey was one of my most anticipated films, probably of all time, when I learned it was going to come out. You see, years ago, I made a video talking about short stories that Creepshow should adapt in the television series. And I brought up that The Monkey would be a perfect candidate for the show because it's a story that you don't take seriously. It's built up like a comic book story in a horror anthology format, and there's some solid morality tales going afoot to kind of provide subtext underneath all of the schlock going on in the story. That's what makes Creepshow great, and I thought that maybe, just maybe, this movie was going to be just peak cinema. Now, I've seen the film 3 times, and I really loved it the first time, and then the second time, I kind of drew my love back a little bit, and now after seeing it a third time, I've kind of accepted where I'm at with it. But I will still say and admit to you all, I still really love this movie in a lot of ways. As a matter of fact, I have here a souvenir popcorn bucket that I picked up from AMC. Now, I actually bought the popcorn bucket before I saw the film the first time because I really wanted to get it for my collection to have with my figurines on my horror shelf back here. So I have a keepsake of probably one of the coolest popcorn buckets I've ever seen in my life to remind me of Stephen King, my love of Creepshow, and I guess this movie. But I'm also going to be a realist about it. I see a lot of differing opinions online about this movie, and it's very divisive. You see, from its tone and how it delivers humor and even the schlock and gore is played up in a very weird way. And this is coming from somebody who's only ever seen from this director one other movie, and that movie was Longlegs. And if you ask me, and I know I might be in the minority when I say this, but I definitely prefer this movie over Longlegs, if I'm speaking my truth here. But that doesn't take away that Osgood Perkins has an eye for film and has an eye for some unique flares that you just don't see in Hollywood these days. But do I think that he was a good fit for this specific story for screen, let alone taking a story that probably would serve best as a 30-minute segment in a television show and fleshing it out over an hour and a half or however long this movie is? That's up for debate. But before we go any further, I'll talk about The Monkey, at least the film here, and give a rundown of what it's generally about. So the story in the movie starts off with a grown man taking a toy monkey to, I guess, a pawn shop to try to sell it back to the owner he bought it from. But unbeknownst to the owner, he doesn't know that this man has already been having some experiences with this possibly possessed, possibly cursed toy monkey that, as you'll see in the movie, when it's wound up on its behind, it starts to move its mouth. And eventually, when I guess it's ready to play its instrument of choice, which is a little drum that he beats his drumsticks on, once the last drum note hits, somebody's gonna die. And unfortunately for the pawn shop owner, that may, in fact, happen to him. And before we get an update about what's going to happen to this man who's in possession of the monkey after he steals a flamethrower from the pawn shop to try to put the monkey out of its misery, I guess, we cut to, I guess, then in the movie, present day. Now, we're following two twin characters who are identical twins, and the main character that you need to know for the entire movie is a bullied kid and the younger of the identical twin siblings. He has a pretty weird life. His dad walked out on his family. He's raised by a single mom, and his older twin constantly berates him and humiliates him at any chance that he can have. And to make matters worse, one day when the boys are rummaging through, I guess, some materials that are found to be left behind by their father, they find this box, and inside of the box is this evil toy monkey that we saw in the beginning of the movie. Now, you might think that, this movie's not going to harm kids, right? And you'd be right. But let's just say these kids, they don't know the gravity of the situation that they're putting themselves in when they find this monkey, and they think that it's just a toy almost immediately, and they decide to wound up the monkey. But the monkey doesn't do anything yet, as their babysitter is going to be taking them out to dinner while, I guess, their mother goes to work or maybe out on a date. I forget the exact details, but let's just say the boys hitch a ride into the van, and they bring along this monkey. And the babysitter, of course, instructs them to leave the monkey in the van while they go inside to this hibachi restaurant to eat. And while the babysitter is flirting with the guy cooking their food, we see the monkey out in the van, possibly moving around and starting to play his music. And once it hits the final note, something may or may not happen to the babysitter in a pretty over-the-top fashion. Now, once we get an understanding of what's going to be happening moving forward, we get cut to a funeral scene where the mom is consoling the boys who literally watched their babysitter die in a really weird fashion. And you're going to see up front and center how this movie's trying to display humor. And I'll just leave it at that. And moving forward from that happenstance, the kids realize that they're holding a loaded gun. And this is a common phenomenon we see in kids' horror stories. You can go to Goosebumps and read a book like Say Cheese and Die, and the main character, Greg, in that book understands at some point of the story that they're holding a loaded gun, and there might be some responsibility with that. Well, here, the main character we need to care about, the bullied twin, is going through mega bullying at school, and perhaps it's actually being lent by his own twin sibling. And it gets to a point in the story where he's fed up, and he decides that the humiliation needs to stop. His life is pretty much shit, and he's going to take it into his own hands to turn on the monkey in hopes that it chooses to kill his brother. Well, let's just say things don't play out like they should, and somebody else gets affected by the monkey, and it possibly is going to affect both of the twins forever. Now, I guess I'll get into a spoiler here because you're probably watching this after seeing the movie anyway. Who ends up dying is their mom. So they're now sent to live with their aunt and their uncle, and we have this weird interaction with the uncle, with the boys. That was, you have to be into dark humor to really laugh at that. But anyways, they are taken and up and moved to a small town in Maine, and the monkey has decided to follow them, despite the boy with glasses who takes it upon himself to kind of hide the evidence of what he's done, I guess in the shame of it all, and because that he doesn't want this thing in his life anymore, has tried to chop it up. But when he chops it up, he sees that perhaps these limbs and things that are making up the monkey might be more flesh in nature, and perhaps this thing might be alive in some happenstance. Well, anyways, when they end up in Maine, the monkey turns up again, and the twin brother, the bully one, is going through, I guess, some PTSD from losing his mom, and he hasn't taken off his suit, and he decides that maybe it's cool if they play with the monkey one last time and see if it's all in their head and test this theory that one of the brothers has about it being completely random of who he targets, right? Well, something may happen to their uncle and they realize that this phenomenon needs to stop, right? So they decide to put it in the box and send it down the well and forget about it and move on with their lives. And they think that they put it all in their past, but as they get much older into adulthood, the brothers have grown estranged. And the second half of the movie essentially starts off with the aunt that we got to see in the first half of the movie dying in a very over-the-top fashion, perhaps due to this phenomenon with the monkey. So the monkey has found itself to be returned, right? And from this point on, we see the adult version of the twin brother with glasses, and we find out that he has an estranged son with a woman who is about, I think, currently married to a character played by Elijah Wood, and Elijah Wood's character is trying to adopt his son. So in one last hurrah for his son's birthday, he wants to take him to an amusement park and have some time with him and kind of feel like a father, which he wants to be, but there's something holding him back from doing so, and we find out later in the movie as to why. But anyways, once the gentleman decides to pick up his son and they head to, visit some of the father's past that he's been keeping from his son because certain happenstances have been happening in the town that he lived in Maine. And there's rumors that perhaps somebody might have bought this toy monkey from this estate sale that this real estate agent was hosting, right? They end up going back to his aunt's house, and he takes his son there, and very quickly they realize that the monkey might still be afoot, and we see something happen to the real estate agent. And then later on, there's all, maybe beforehand, I kind of forget the sequence of events here because they're very close together in the film, but we see very close by to this scene, somebody might perish in a very over-the-top way in a hotel swimming pool where the guy and his kid are staying. Well, the guy puts two and two together and starts to get in contact with his estranged brother, which starts at the hotel, essentially. And they're piecing together the phenomenon, and they realize that the monkey has to be around. And perhaps, maybe this is going to be the way for them to connect back together. Well, through all this, the man's son is starting to poke and ask questions and is trying to get to know him. But the guy is very reserved, and he's very apprehensive of telling his son the truth about this killer monkey toy because A, it's going to be hard to believe, and B, it's the main reason why he's been so distant from his son, because he doesn't want to get close to his son and have his son be given the curse, if something ever were to happen to him, of the same thing that his father cursed him with. So that's why he's been essentially a deadbeat dad. Well, to skip over some odd phenomenon, let's just say perhaps there's some fuckery afoot going on with the twin brother who has been estranged from the main character in the back half of the movie. And it may or may not involve the same guy who plays a role. And I don't mean the same guy, but when I say the same guy, I'm saying the guy who played Corey Cunningham in Halloween Ends is the guy who bought the monkey from the estate sale. Let's just say there's some, like I said, fuckery going on with that. And we see a few more people die and some people succumb to the curse of the monkey. Well, it ends up to a point where we as the audience realize what exactly this twin brother's plan is and perhaps his motives as to why he's trying to essentially kill his twin brother. And it builds up to this climax of the movie where the main character and his son end up at this place of residence, or I guess place of hermitage, where this his twin brother is residing in. And we see this layer of sorts and perhaps this attempt to get the ball rolling with a certain character so that his twin brother can pretty much die by the monkey. And it turns out that it might be backfiring and causing way more chaos amongst the whole town than he anticipated. Let's just say The climax pretty much results in one of the twins dying. Now, I'm not going to spoil which one, but you need to see the movie for yourself if you haven't seen it. And once we figure out who's going to come out of the situation alive, there may be a lot more on the table supernaturally going on in this town in the aftermath of the monkey. And maybe whoever still possesses the monkey realizes that they can't get rid of it, and they might as well, I guess, safeguard it and keep it away from other people so they don't have to feel the misery that it's caused in their lives. And I'll just leave it there. I'm going to say this off the bat. I do have a lot of positives with this movie, and a lot of it stems down to Osgood Perkins' way of telling a story at first. I think the first half of this film is very intriguing, and I think the acting is pretty well done. And the setup to the story is so engaging, and it's so much fun, until it stops being fun at a certain point to a degree. But I will say that I think Osgood Perkins has an eye for setting up just over-the-top moments. And for a movie like this, it made the movie really fun and enjoyable when that stuff was there. And I think his cinematography was very well done as well. I think the acting across this film was spectacular. I don't have any gripes with the performances whatsoever, even in the second half with the adult twins and what have you. I think given that multiple actors had to play multiple roles in this movie, they made it look believable, and they worked around these hurdles in a very cool way. And you see this stuff done in film before, in movies like The Parent Trap, with Lindsay Lohan playing two characters or what have you. But here, you kind of forgot that that was a thing throughout the whole movie. Like, oh, this actor is playing two different characters in one scene. So that was really cool. And yeah, I have to tip my hat to all the performers in this movie. They brought what the material was giving them. And I'm going to say this now. There is a mood to this movie where you understand that this monkey is a metaphorical gun, and when it's loaded and you're ready to fire, you don't know who's going to die. So there's anticipation. Once the monkey comes onto screen, you pretty much know that someone's going to fucking die, and you're just waiting for what over-the-top moment's about to happen. And there's legitimately shocking and surprising moments in some of these deaths. And you can kind of see some build-up in a very Final Destination way. But the directions it goes, you don't see how it ends. And for that, I think the movie succeeds at least making the kills and the deaths and the spectacles that a lot of people probably came to this movie for exciting. And there's something about this movie's subtext and themes. You know, I've already brought up the loaded gun allegory with the monkey itself, but you're also looking at generational trauma going on and how that affects characters and their decisions and how they treat people, including their own children. And you can kind of look at this like a character study, at least from the main character's point of view, about how trauma sticks with you throughout life and how hard it is really to get over it. But at the same time, it also makes you think, especially when you're up there in age, like especially in your 30s, or you might be a parent by this point in your life. If you're out there watching, you might understand this, that you don't want this baggage to weigh down your family and your own children. And if you have that stuff, if you keep it closed off and hid it inside, all it's going to do, if you keep these secrets and keep these regrets and these fears bottled up, eventually, when it does come to the surface, it's going to be hard to kind of make up for lost time for you lying and being distant from people. And this movie, thankfully for a set of characters like the main character and his son, they're kind of able to overcome that obstacle in their relationship, but it makes you think that most of the time you're probably not going to be lucky in that situation. And for this being a piece of fiction, I kind of like that they went this direction because it gives it a happier outcome than not life normally would hand you in this situation, I feel. So, yeah, for that, I think that the subtext is very rich, and you can see what the film is trying to talk about. Now, getting into the mixed and the negatives for me here, I'm going to be upfront. The way this film is delivering humor, the best way to describe this movie, and I've been trying to figure out what to call this. I would consider this more of a dark comedy in the vein of something like Very Bad Things or Ravenous, because the humor is pretty much identical to those movies. However, the framing of that humor feels like the Royal Tenenbaums, Nacho Libre, and Napoleon Dynamite. And I don't know if that's a good thing. This film heavily, and I mean heavily, relies on deadpan humor. And as a matter of fact, in one of the viewings I saw this film in, I think it might have been my second viewing, I was the only person laughing in the theater in a packed house. It was stone quiet for a good amount of the movie, and especially when the jokes were happening. And I realized that maybe, just maybe, that this movie isn't as funny to majority of people as I thought it was the first time, because the first time I watched it, I guess it was opening weekend and people were excited and were laughing along with the movie. So I got a taste of different audiences than most people would with this film, but as I saw it multiple times, I found it less and less funny, and I found myself cringing more often than not. So for that, I think rewatchability, at least in terms of this humor that the film brings, might not fare the best. And I'm also going to be upfront here. Osgood Perkins decided to edit this movie in a weird fucking way. For some reason, anytime a death happens, we have to cut to deadpan humor and running gag humor involving a funeral picture and playing church pew music and shit like that. And I'll admit, it's funny the first time, but the film does it so often to kind of nail that in. And when the film does decide to get gory, a lot of the times it cuts away in like a weird stop frame, and then it cuts to the next scene. I don't know why that was done that way. I don't know if that was Osgood Perkins directing, or his direction and creativity, or perhaps the studio being involved. I'd be curious to see a potential director's cut come out of this movie, because who knows what really he was trying to pull off there. But I will say the transitions in this movie can be all over the place and quite jarring because of that aspect. And I'm going to be upfront about the plot of the movie. Compared to the short story, this is very, very stretched out. In my opinion, this does not need to be a 90-plus minute movie. This should have been a 30-minute Creepshow segment, because you can really feel, especially in that middle portion of the movie, once the kids grow into adults. Yeah, it's kind of slow, if I'm being honest. But I will say the caveat is it does try to explore characters. However, the character exploration stuff here, I will say, is very hit or miss. And the only two characters that really get a lot of focus in the movie, especially in the second half, is the main character and his son, which I guess is more poignant to build on, but still, you don't really feel much for these characters. And especially the son character, when he comes into the situation, you feel empathy for him, but then again, you're also kind of rooting against the father, and you don't know why until the back half, and it just kind of makes it uninteresting. And I noticed that each and every time that I've watched this movie, it gets more and more annoying to sit through. And I think part of that is because we're so reliant on the character stuff, we have to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of the plot, which generally is just this. The boys play around with a loaded gun, innocent people get involved, like the mom, and they lose their life. And the twins have a grudge with each other in adulthood, and essentially are trying to fight over possession of the monkey to not only save innocent people, but to prevent one of them from dying. And as we'll see with one of the twins, they literally die by messing with the monkey too far, let's just say. And that does not need an hour and a half to 100 minutes to tell. And I think a lot of people would have been probably jonesed to see this in a hypothetical Creepshow film if it ran like 3 segments and brought back Creepshow from the dead into film. The monkey would have been a perfect story for a hypothetical movie. But I can totally see why people are upset with the runtime of this, and especially fans of the short story being let down and bored with it in some aspects. But I will say this, why this movie is worthy of being in Creepshow is essentially how it delivers the story. It does feel like a comic book story in nature. As a matter of fact, the first time I ever picked up Skeleton Crew, I was jonesing to read some of the stories that I never heard from Stephen King about, because I was more of a casual the first time I picked up the book. And when I read The Monkey, I was like, why didn't Stephen King ever pick this to be put into Creepshow back in the 80s? I mean, if this segment was in Creepshow 2, it could have been a fan favorite, but it wouldn't have near as the budget that this full-length feature version did, which may or may not be a good or bad thing, but we don't know because it never existed. But in my headcanon, I think it would have worked splendidly well. But I digress. The story is formatted like a typical anthology comic story. You have your over-the-top schlock, your silly premise you have to put a lot of disbelief at the door with, but it's pixelating with it and it offers some subtext underneath all the schlock to provide some substance and legitimacy, which is what the Creepshow franchise has historically done. It takes turn your brain off schlock horror and mixes it with what people I guess would call today elevated horror or thought provocation horror, and it puts it into a blender, and it's made to be a little all over the place for everyone to enjoy. And for that, I can't help but love it. If I had to rate this film from a 0 to 5 star basis, if I'm being real with myself, the score has gone down from the first time I watched it. But if you ask me, when I saw it the first time, I was going to give it a 4.75 out of 5 stars. However, by the time I've seen it a third time, I'm going to settle with a 4 out of 5 stars. And it's because, like I said, I think the humor gets in the way in each individual viewing, and it takes it down a notch each and every time. And also the plot and some annoyances with some characters do kind of show the more you watch it. But I will say, it still is a fun rewatch, and you get to catch up on things that you might have missed the first time because you're more excited about what the monkey's going to do than really paying attention to some other things that the film offers. And for that, I do think that this is a very rewatchable movie, and when this comes out on physical, I will be buying this for my collection. So, that's my thoughts on The Monkey. Let me know down in the comment section if you've seen this movie, what's your thoughts on it, and if you have any films that feel like Creepshow in your opinion, that you think would be interesting for me to talk about in a future episode, please let me know down in the comment section. I'm always dying to look for more movies for this playlist, let's just say. So, until next time, take care.